back. You're watching Infosys 3.0 and we are in conversation with the new chairman of the Infosys board, SHESHASAYEE. You know, Mr. SHESHASAYEE, there's been so much talk over several quarters on what Infosys attempts to do with the cash that it's sitting on. Vishal Sikka has articulated that he would like to do niche acquisitions. He would like to keep a pile of cash for a rainy day. There's, of course, been a lot of talk on whether the board will be in support of a buyback plan or not. You have changed or revised your dividend policy very recently. What is the thought? What is the philosophy as far as the cash utilization policy is concerned? What are the options that are on the table? What is the board's thinking?
Well, I would accept that the investors have a legitimate right to know what the board's thinking on with regard to the capital allocation. Which we have recently now articulated and hope to have the board to get more specific on this over time. But as I said, the broad philosophy of this is that we acknowledge and recognize that idle cash beyond the point is not right from the point of view of the investor owners. And therefore, we need to have the cash doing better job in the interest of value accretion for the investors. As I said, philosophically, this would mean that beyond what we currently have, the attempt would be to either have a more aggressive dividend policy, which we've already articulated. I'm not saying that's cast in stone, we can revisit. Either the dividend payout or using that for good acquisition, where acquisition opportunities present themselves. And I will also say here that the Infosys will step on the pedal in terms of looking at acquisitions, because in this world which is going to demand very unique kind of solutions, we have a number of companies, startups, we have a number of young companies which are capable of providing those. And therefore acquisition will be a very relevant strategy to become competitive in this new world, and therefore we will try and seek out acquisitions to the extent that we can, but we have to be very careful that this is not in any manner destructive of value. And the third is that beyond the dividend payout and acquisitions, we will also need the capex for ensuring that we provide competitive infrastructure for all our people to work and to get the right kind of value to the client.
So, Mr. SHESHASAYEE, when could we see a decision being taken on the specific issues that you've just articulated? For instance, on the dividend policy, are we likely to see you revisit your dividend policy as early as this year, because you've just recently revised it?
We have just articulated the dividend policy, SHEREEN, and I think, as I said, if we find that the acquisition landscape is going to demand more cash, or the growth is going to require more cash for infrastructure, then correspondingly, as you'll appreciate, the dividend policy will have to be calibrated. I don't see revisiting of the dividend policy, at least for this year, but we will keep in mind that we will reassert this policy perhaps annually or once in 2 years, to make sure that we are in line with our thinking on the acquisition and the capex. But the bottom line is that we beyond what we have just now by way of a cash pile, the board believes that it would not be necessary to add on to the cash pile, and we have to make it work better for the growth of the company.
So let me ask you about acquisition, since you were talking about that issue. In that 5-year plan, Vishal Sikka has articulated that about $1.5 billion will come in from M&A, $2 billion will come in from new businesses. So if you were to look at the kind of capabilities that you need to build, the kind of opportunities or spaces or niches that Infosys would like to get into, what looks exciting to you at this point in time?
I think technology in a very broad sense. It's not so much of the client capture, it's not so much of getting into new geographies, but technology would be the prime driver. And in that, again, I think, as I said earlier, in the technology that enables this company to look at this business models that come out of the blurring of the physical and the virtual world in specific domains, wherever that has been enabled by any kind of development by any company, that would be a very interesting acquisition target. Like, for example, what we did in Panaya. it's not so much what Panaya does, which is interesting, but the horizontal deployment capabilities that we have with a company like Panaya. I think so. The force multiplier in terms of what we can do with the technology to reach out to more clients, to reach out to get better solutions, that would be the important determinant for acquisitions.
You know, I would like to revisit the headwind issues that we just spoke about. Let me ask you about the regulatory environment. And I know you cannot comment specifically on your visa-related issues, but since you are also the head of the Infosys Audit Committee, can you share with us how large a concern the regulatory environment is, the visa regulations are, and what Infosys is doing to mitigate this risk?
You know, let me answer this in two parts. Firstly, I think we have already said this quite a few times, and I will repeat this, that the company has a very rigorous process for ensuring compliance. I like to think that this is perhaps a benchmark practice in the industry. So therefore, we have not an iota of doubt in our minds that we are fully compliant with the regulatory requirements in any geography, in any jurisdiction that we operate in. That said, I think the larger question is about, given the fact that there is going to be this huge skill shortage globally, particularly with the demographics panning out the way they are in the next decade, mobility, even given the fact that in the virtual world you don't require physical mobility and you can access, of course, on the virtually any talent, given the fact that you require the skills across the world, mobility, physical mobility is going to be very, very critical. I think it's important that the countries now go beyond their narrow interest of the here and now problems of job creation, so job market, to say what is the mobility framework that is required to get talent to come from outside geographies in order to be able to build competitive businesses.
You know, Mr. SHESHASAYEE, one of the concerns that people who've tracked Infosys or who've known the company for a long time have expressed is that Vishal Sikka is based outside of India. He's not at the headquarters. And whether this is in the long-term interest of the company, whether he's spending enough time here in India. Has this at all been a concern that the board has taken up in any form or fashion? What is the board's opinion on this issue?
Let me say that, you know, from a board's perspective, there are only, you know, three things which we need to be really accountable for to the shareholders. One is, do we have the right leadership? And I think we certainly have an extraordinary leader in Vishal, a very appropriate leader for the times. The second thing that we need to be accountable is whether we are giving shareholder value, we are giving growth, the strategies are in place to deliver the shareholder value. And as I said earlier, we are fully aligned to the strategy that Vishal has articulated. And the third is governance. Are we making sure that we provide the right moral compass for the business to operate in? Beyond that, where the leadership sits, how many days that Vishal clocks in Bangalore, I think are beyond the concern of the board. And if we do get into it, it would be completely incorrect, because that's not the job of the board.
Since we're talking about the growth agenda, sir, in terms of competitive advantages, how closely does the board look at things like market share, transformational deals that are being bagged by your competitors? How closely do you look at the pecking order, for instance? What is the mandate from the board to the management on these parameters?
Well, you know, again, you know that I come from an industry where we are obsessed with competition. If you'll talk nothing other than competition. That's because that's the nature of the industry. In IT industry, for a long time, the opportunities were so immense that we were content to have a growth target for the business, and that came as a result of internal competitors' capabilities. Now, I think we cannot ignore competition. We need to say, how do we get our growth rates, not merely by doing things better and therefore capturing new opportunities, but also take away market share from our competitors. So it is very important. And to that extent, the strategies which build competitiveness of the business are critical. And to that extent, the board has to have an understanding of the strategies. But let me make this clear. The strategy formulation is management's job. But getting the board to understand the strategy in the context of the environment, in the context of its competitive strengths is very critical. We had recently in the board, we spent quite some time in immersion sessions trying to get a more clinical understanding of the landscape that we are operating in, the competitive merits and demerits that we have, the kind of strategies that are necessary to be put in place for the purpose of sharpening our competitiveness. All of that is being very much being discussed with the board, and we hope to have immersion sessions continuously, because this is a fast-changing world. We need to be learning constantly. We need to be ensuring that we don't fall behind in terms of our learning and therefore not give the right kind of support. So it's a learning process. We have some extraordinary leaders in the board, and I think we are very fortunate to have their guidance and their understanding of the business so closely.
Well, on that note, Mr. SHESHASAYEE, thanks very much for joining us here on the CNBC-TV18 special and for articulating what the strategy for growth is at Infosys. Appreciate your time, and here's wishing you all the very best in your new innings as the chairman of Infosys. With that, it is time for us to wrap up Infosys 3.0. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.